This is Between the Brackets, a MediaWiki podcast, episode 25, January 8th, 2019. Welcome to Between the Brackets. I'm Yaron Koren, and my guest for this episode is Denny Vrandečić. He is the co-creator of Semantic MediaWiki alongside Markus Krötzsch, but he is best known as the father of Wikidata, the website that aims to be a multilingual, machine-readable database of the world's general knowledge. I've known Denny since he and Markus were lowly graduate students at what was then known as the University of Karlsruhe in 2007. A few years later, it was renamed to KIT. I actually even met them briefly at the Wikimania in 2006, so I've known him for a good while. In Europe, there's the tradition of the picaresque novel, which is a novel about someone from modest circumstances who seems to end up in every kind of situation. And Denny's life fits that description pretty well, I would say. Denny's a Croatian-German, although now I guess I should call him a Croatian-German-American. While in graduate school, he and Markus came up with the idea of a semantic Wikipedia, then created Semantic MediaWiki, and were involved in that project for the next 7 years or so. Then Denny spearheaded what became Wikidata. He had the idea in 2010 or so, and then he spent, I think, most of 2011 trying to get funding for it. Then after he did get the funding, he moved to Berlin and assembled a team there which released Wikidata in 2012. Then a few years later, he moved to sunny Silicon Valley in the US to work for Google, where he still lives and works. Soon after that, he was elected to the Wikimedia Foundation Board of Trustees, where he was briefly public enemy number 1, or maybe number 2 or 3, for being part of a supposed takeover of Wikimedia by the tech corporations. He resigned after 10 months, wisely I think. Along the way, he managed to marry a fellow Wikipedia user that he met at Wikimania in 2011. And I haven't even mentioned his background as a role-playing games guru in the 90s. We'll be talking about at least some of those experiences in this episode. Denny, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Yaron. Thank you for the introduction.
Before we get to anything else, this is something I sort of know, but I want to ask about it anyway. You have 2 C's in your last name, and each one has its own accent on it, which means that they must be pronounced differently in some way.
In fact,
could you explain the difference between the 2 C's?
Yes, they are indeed pronounced differently. Often many accents of Serbian or Croatian, the differences are basically are disappearing. But still, so the first one has a little like a check mark on it, and it's pronounced ch. And the second one has like a French accent aigu. It goes just to the right hand, and it's pronounced che. This is, I guess, especially with the recording, it's hard to hear the difference. So the first one is more voiced. It's like a ch. It's it has more voice. Second one is che. It's less voice. It's more air, more hissing. I don't know what the technical terms for those are, but yeah, they're supposed to have differences. So it's Vrandečić. And in the end, you basically end almost with a ch sound, like you don't have any sh left at all.
Very good. So I had an interview on this podcast with Markus Krötzsch last year where he described how the two of you sort of accidentally started the Semantic MediaWiki project after finding out that the first ever Wikimedia conference, Wikimania 2005, was going to be held in Frankfurt.
Right.
So that was not far from where you two were, and you decided that you wanted to give a talk there since you were both interested in Wikipedia as well as the semantic web. So I'm not going to ask about that because anybody who wants to hear more about it can and should listen to the episode with Markus. But I want to ask you something specific about it. In Markus's case, he's now a professor in more or less the same field that he was in before the two of you got into anything MediaWiki related. So you can think of all this SMW, Wikidata, etc. stuff as just an interesting side detour for him that didn't really affect his career trajectory. But in your case, the SMW and Wikidata projects have had a direct impact on where you work, where you live, and even your wife and family. So let me ask you, what do you think you would be doing right now if Wikimania 2005 had been held somewhere other than Frankfurt, Germany?
That's a great question. I never thought about that. I honestly have no idea. It would be very different, obviously. I don't know. This is a big what-if question, and yeah, I mean...
Well, you were on track to going into academia to some extent.
I mean, especially in the semantic web area, there were a lot of PhD students around. It's obvious that not all of them can become professors or stay in academia, particularly not in Germany, where we don't have, like in England or in the US, you have stable positions in academia which are not professorships. Right. In Germany, basically, if you don't land a professorship, you're out at some point. It's just the way the system is structured. And people like Rudi Studer had more than 70 PhD students. Rudi was both Markus and mine, Dr. Father, PhD supervisor.
Right.
And he had a huge amount of PhD students and people who finished the PhDs. And it's obvious that not all of them can become professors.
Yeah, okay. Oh, that's interesting. Was there anything in your childhood, speaking about your past, whether it was role-playing games or science fiction or anything else that, looking back, sort of stoked your interest in knowledge and creating some kind of universal knowledge base?
Yes, in fact, there was. As a child, between childhood and teenager, I was actually reading an encyclopedia. It was just a children's encyclopedia, not those huge ones. My father also bought one of the big ones, but I was pretty much intimidated by that. Also, it was on a shelf which was too high for me to reach. So I had a children's encyclopedia which I actually read from. In its entirety, also not from cover to cover, but I was reading every article in it and then following all the references and keeping track of what I read and what I didn't and so on. It was kind of, actually I wrote the whole thing up at one point. I can add a link to the website if you want. So, how little Denny was reading that encyclopedia, and I think it did have quite an influence on me. My father then later bought bigger 10-volume encyclopedia that we had at home, which I referenced a lot. And just this ready availability of knowledge always was just a part of that. And then when the web came along, it was so obvious that you need to put an encyclopedia into the web to make it really accessible for everyone, everywhere. And I think the idea that Wikipedia also is editable by everyone is brilliant. This is really what changes the whole equation entirely, and I found this idea so fascinating that I stayed with that forever. The other thing is actually with role-playing games, I wasn't just playing them. I was at a very young age already contributing texts and writing them, which had been published, and I met the authors very early, which kind of showed me that you don't only have to consume, you can actually write yourself. You can actually go ahead and be part of creating this kind of things. So today I don't write anymore for fantasy and role-playing, but it was a very, very important lesson as a teenager that you can actually create and contribute to a thing bigger than yourself very early on.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Jimmy Wales also, I think, talks about how he had an encyclopedia as a child that really affected him. In retrospect, I don't think he was ever a dungeon master though, but you at least have one of those in common. I'm jumping around topics here, but do you follow? I'm actually not going to ask that much about Semantic MediaWiki. Do you follow the current Semantic MediaWiki project at all? Or for that matter, do you follow anything related to MediaWiki other than Wikidata and Wikibase?
I wish I would follow it more, but to be honest, I don't too tightly. So from time to time, I look into it. Especially I like reading like what happened this year article and so on, but not more detailed than that basically. So I'm really not aware of the current ongoings in those areas.
Yeah, okay. So let's talk about Wikidata. For those people who don't know about it, could you give an explanation of it and explain its current scope?
Wikidata is a knowledge base that anyone can edit. This means that very similar to Wikipedia. You can just go, you can read it. Also, it's very, very boring for reading. But you can also go and edit it. And you can, the special thing is that it's all structured knowledge. So it's very close. The structured model allows us to actually query the information. So unlike Wikipedia articles, you can go ahead and ask for specific filters. For example, give me all the cities which are located at the Hudson River and that have a population between 10,000 and 80,000. This is something which is implicitly contained in Wikipedia. Wikipedia obviously has this knowledge, but in order to figure that out, you need to do quite a little bit of investigation and reading to get to this information. With Wikidata, you can basically create a query and you get the answer, and then you have the answer. You can visualize it on a map, or you can get it as JSON data and do whatever you want with it as a code and so on. So the idea is really that we have a knowledge base that everyone can edit, access, reuse, query, and so on.
Yeah. So what about its current scope? I mean, how much data is in there, and how is it being used at the moment?
It's always the question how you count. So there are about 50 million things that have entries in Wikidata. The scope is aimed at It started with everything that has a Wikipedia page and has since then expanded quite a bit. Particularly, it has expanded to cover a lot of literature, scientific papers, which could be used as references for the statements inside of Wikidata or Wikipedia. And one of the more ambitious goals around Wikidata is actually to cover all of scientific literature. And
Wow.
this is the Wikisite project, which Wikisite itself is asking whether this really should be the goal. Should it be a bit more modest? Should it cover only the literature cited inside of Wikipedia and related literature? Should it cover everything? But they're well on the way actually of covering everything. So they have already a good percentage of what's out there, and so they're further on the ambitious goal than people might know. Other things is to have a pretty good grasp on the usual core knowledge, meaning like locations, events, and so on. And this comes already with Wikipedia having a pretty good coverage of that. So Wikidata reflects that. So the scope is ambitious, and on the one side, is still far away from actually achieving the scope. So there's a lot of stuff that's not there. But at the same time, the content is already more mature than Wikipedia was at a similar age, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, this would be 2007, I guess, the equivalent of 2007 or 2008 for... I guess 2008, actually, for...
Actually,
for
Wikipedia was pretty mature already in 2007, 2008. So I guess they're pretty much on the same line.
So you said 15 million pages or entities, or however you want to call them. How many facts, aka triples, if we're getting technical?
So in terms of statements, so Wikidata has a more rich form of representing knowledge besides simple triples. In form of statements is
that's true.
Yeah, it's a form of statements about 600 to 700 million statements currently, and it's growing quite quickly. If you turn that into triples, I don't know what the current number is, but it was around, I don't know, somewhere between 5 and 10 billion triples or whatever.
Oh, wow.
So that's roughly the area where the numbers are, but I'm not exactly sure about triples.
Yeah, okay. And what kind of usage is it getting, I guess, most importantly, within Wikipedia itself?
Yes.
But if there's anything else noteworthy.
So Wikipedia is using it increasingly widely, especially a lot of smaller language Wikipedias. But also on the English Wikipedia, you have now entire infoboxes which are completely populated by Wikidata. You don't have any local information anymore. Which I'm not sure if this is really the best way to use Wikidata. There are more and more external organizations that are using Wikidata. Museums, libraries, archives, and galleries, particularly the cultural memory institutions, are basically using Wikidata as a shared vocabulary to refer to people, to refer to entities, to cultural products, and so on. So there's more and more usage of that to use basically Wikidata as a widely represented, shared, and commonly curated vocabulary of almost everything. And then they're also used by big companies like Google, for which I work, or Apple and Microsoft, who are using data from Wikidata to answer queries, to answer questions with their respective intelligent assistants like the Google Assistant or Siri or Cortana, or also Amazon. Yeah.
And Alexa.
Alexa.
Right.
Alexa. So there's plenty of that also going on. And the nice thing about Wikidata is that anyone can go ahead and use it. There's this project which was started by students in France, Ask Platypus, where they basically recreated within half a year a question answering system based on Wikidata. And the cool thing really was, you go in, you ask a question, it gives you an answer, it's wrong, you go to Wikidata, you edit it, you ask again, you get the right thing. So this is a cool and very tight loop which you don't have with any of the industrial things. So here you have a lot of this, everyone can share into it and edit into it and work with it, and anyone can use it, which makes it nice.
Yeah. That's really cool. I didn't know about some of those. What's an example of an article people can see, I guess ideally in the English language Wikipedia, where the info box was automatically generated? Do you happen to know?
Yeah, my go-to example is the South Pole Telescope.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's interesting that you said that you don't necessarily agree with that usage.
Yes. So, okay. The reason is I have to answer a bit wider for that to explain why. So one of the advantages of Wikidata is that the data that you have in Wikidata gets more eyeballs if it's wider used, right? So if you have, for example, let's assume you have a little town in Croatia where I come from. So I make sure that all the towns on the island I come from in Croatia actually have entries in Wikidata, have their population, have their location, etc., etc. Everything is there. So a lot of these towns have articles in dozens of different Wikipedia languages. And there they have a population, often they have little info boxes or not, information. And often this data is outdated because, people don't edit much the content about a Croatian town in the Portuguese Wikipedia. And why should they? It's not a particularly interesting topic for them. So someone created the topic and entered the population, and that's it. If someone comes and vandalizes that topic in population, it won't get as many eyeballs, and not so many people will see and notice that there's an error. If it comes from Wikidata, we have one central place where it goes to all the Wikipedias, or all the Wikipedias that want to use this data. And if they just ask for it and show it, this means, great, now we have more eyeballs and people can go and fix it in Wikidata.
Right.
So this sounds like a great way to do it. But there's one additional layer we could have. So a big Wikipedia, like the English one or the German one, or even a smaller Wikipedia on topics that are particularly interesting to them, like for Portuguese town in the Portuguese Wikipedia. They could have the information locally and compare it with what comes from Wikidata. And if there's something off, you could get a warning. You could be on a maintenance. You could show up on a maintenance page or something like that. So in that case, we have 2 layers of holding information and being controlled by slightly different communities. You have people on Wikidata, you have people on the local Wikipedias who check that. And if something's off, the chances of finding and discovering vandalism is higher, and it's easier to keep the quality in check in those cases. It's not so important for something like a population, which is a number that changes frequently, and maybe you want to just pull it from a central place and have other mechanisms of checking those here. But for example, if you look at things like the founding date of a country or the capital of a country or whatever, things that don't change particularly often, it would make sense to have those more layers of protection into it, and to get, and especially if we have active communities locally that can provide this kind of work. This additionally plays into the wish of many local communities that they actually want to keep an eye of this data. So I know that the German and the English Wikipedia, for example, particularly don't like Wikidata because they don't want to transfer the responsibility for the data to a different place where they have now to watch it and so on. And a lot of this was tackled with the development team by integrating the watch list functionality between Wikidata and Wikipedia more, so that people can actually keep an eye on it easier from the local Wikipedias without ever going to Wikidata and so on. But still, with having this double layer of information, not only you keep local control, you could say, if my data is different than what comes from Wikidata, use my data. You can also have at the same time a second layer where you can have maintenance pages which tell you, and here we have discrepancies between the local Wikipedia and the Wikidata. And this allows them people to more effectively go and figure out what's going on, to see if vandalism has happened, if the world has changed, if data has improved, or whatever it is that causes this kind of discrepancies. And I would like to see those natural tendencies of the Wikipedia communities and their ability to keep an eye on the data be more aligned with each other, which would also help with smoothing the relations between the different communities more and so on. So I think there's still potential to actually improve the way that the different communities are maintaining and owning the data.
Right. But realistically speaking, there's only a handful of Wikipedias, language Wikipedias, where that really could even come up, that people, place more trust on their own community than on Wikidata to have correct information. Maybe only English and German. I'm not even sure, but definitely probably no more than 5 to 10 of the 300 or so Wikipedias.
This might be true if you look at the whole of each Wikipedia, but if you look at specific areas in each of the Wikipedias, I think this is not necessarily the case. I think for Romanian towns, the Romanian Wikipedia might have a good call on being more current and more complete than any other one, and even the Wikidata, and so on. So there might be areas of interest inside of a local Wikipedia where the local community has particular interest and particular resources to actually look into it. So yes, I agree. About Japanese towns, we probably won't have much coverage in Welsh Wikipedia, sure. Right. But about Welsh towns, I would give a lot of trust to the Welsh Wikipedia.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Sure. Let me ask about categories. That of course is the other big, quasi-structured aspect of Wikipedia that it seems like could and should be replaced by Wikidata, whether gradually or all at once. Something. How has that been going? Has there been any thought or interest in using Wikidata for categories, or just instead of categories completely?
Not that I'm aware of. So categories in the local Wikipedias are not only used for categorizing the articles, but also they're used for a lot of maintenance work,
Sure.
which is very local to the given Wikipedias. And categories have evolved very differently on the different Wikipedias. So I'm aware of a lot of...
Right. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
You go ahead.
Well, sorry. I mean, I'm not talking about replacing the whole mechanism of categories, but when you look at some, I don't know if it's like this on every Wikipedia, but on the English language Wikipedia, when there's 50 categories, and a lot of them are just different infobox fields in different combinations with one another.
Yeah.
Like 20th century French generals or whatever it is, where that's really just a set of filters being applied in different combinations.
Right. I mean, there's some potential to clean up some of that. But it's really up to the local Wikipedias, obviously, how they want to handle it. One of the things that I am aware of is there's a lot of research projects who are doing the opposite way, who are using the categories on the local Wikipedias in order to infer data for Wikidata.
Okay.
So they are basically learning, because Wikidata has still a lot of gaps, right? And there's a lot of things we can learn from categories and then enter it to Wikidata. And I guess at some point, it's always a question about how much effort do the local Wikipedias want to spend in maintaining those categories, or how easy it is to get to a place where we can use a solution that involves Wikidata instead of that. And these balances shift all the time depending on availability of volunteers, depending on the completeness of the data, and so on. So, but I don't think there has been any concentrated effort to reduce the usage of categories in any of the local Wikipedia so far.
Yeah. Okay. I want to shoehorn in some unrelated questions about Wikidata before we get to the more interesting, conceptual stuff. Who is in charge of Wikidata at the moment?
Lydia Pincher is as far as anyone is in charge of Wikidata. So Lydia is the PM of Wikidata at Wikimedia Deutschland.
Yeah.
And she's leading the software development. Obviously, just as with Wikipedia, no one is in charge of Wikidata as the project.
Well, right, right, sure, I was talking the back end, and Wikimedia, and it's under the cover or whatever the term is of Wikimedia Deutschland, the German Wikimedia chapter.
Yes.
And this is actually something I've wondered about. You spent a lot of, I think, 2011 trying to get funding for Wikidata. I don't think we've ever talked about the mechanics of that. Did you have to fly to California and Seattle, where the people who eventually gave the funding, including Google, are based, or was it all done remotely? And did you have to get letters of recommendation or something, or did they know who you were already?
Yes, to all. So for some of the funding, I was flying to meet people, to talk with them, to convince them, give them presentations and stuff. For others, it was someone else just doing the whole acquisition and finding a person and so on. There was a lot of flights and meetings that went nowhere. So there have been a lot of people that asked for funding that eventually didn't give us anything. So it was a year with a lot of ups and downs.
So with the funding also, a lot of people helped, obviously, to get me to the right connections, but also sometimes they handled entirely the funding, getting partners for funding themselves. So big help came from Lisa Grubel, who was working at the Wikimedia, and still is working at the Wikimedia Foundation, who got a big chunk of the funding.
Also, Markus was tremendously important for getting the financing for Wikidata, and so he was the one to convince Paul Allen and the AI Squared Institute to put a hole in this. Actually, it was half of the initial money for Wikidata, and
right.
with this money, it was so much easier to go to other potential funders and to talk to them. And because we already had Paul Allen, which means, you're betting on something that was already vetted by him, so it was getting easier.
Oh, wow.
At Google, I got a lot of help from Chris DeBona, who is still heading the open source program at Google. And but there was also a lot of traveling to other places, with meeting with other people, trying to find other sources of funding. With the European Union, we didn't get very far because it simply didn't fit into the mechanisms of funding, even though we tried really hard to get it in there. And many others, which sometimes just timed a little bit off. So a bit later, we then did get some funding from others, and so it was always, it was a very interesting year.
Yeah. That is interesting. Yeah, I know those people. I didn't know actually that they were all connected to this process. That's really interesting, actually. So back to the theory of it, I guess. The toughest nut to crack, I would think, is the free text of each article, the actual contents. That's something that Wikidata isn't equipped for at the moment. I mean, it's one thing to be able to store that someone was born on some date. It's another to store that, they had a difficult childhood and felt out of place at school or whatever it is. You addressed this issue in a white paper you put online about 2 months ago called Toward an Abstract Wikipedia, which I guess in turn is based on a talk you gave earlier. It's a very interesting read, and there'll be a link to it in the page for this episode. I definitely think it's worth reading. In it, you describe the concept of having a sort of master Wikipedia that contains articles that can then be machine translated into all the other languages. You make a compelling case that having that kind of approach would be a godsend for people who want to read Wikipedia in anything other than the major languages, since there's so little content in maybe 90% of the Wikipedia sites right now, relatively speaking. You also make a compelling case that this master Wikipedia should be written in a special custom syntax rather than in a natural language, since no one language, and certainly not English, is precise enough that it can always be translated automatically. As you note, even a simple concept like uncle can have multiple words in some languages. In the case of uncle, it depends on whether it's on the mother's or father's side. So this syntax would actually use Wikidata entity identifiers, Q, whatever it is, in place of all nouns, and maybe in place of most or all verbs, adjectives, etc. That part, I guess, is a little more up in the air. And then it's just a matter of putting all that together and specifying the contents of each sentence in some kind of function call, although that too is, sort of open for discussion.
Yes.
Finally, there would be what you call the renderers, which are large sets of rules, one set for each language, to turn that abstract syntax into text for each language. And the renderers themselves, that set of rules, could also potentially be done wiki-style and publicly editable. Did I describe the basic idea correctly?
I think, that's a very good description. Thank you.
All right, great. What has been the response to that white paper and specifically, well, especially to your idea of a Wikidata-based universal language, but really to all of it?
Right. So there's a bit of a funny thing going on. So as with Wikidata, when we originally proposed it, or Semantic Wikipedia as we call it, I mean, the response has been from, this is completely nuts and will never work, to, wow, this looks so simple, we should just go ahead and do it. And so it got basically the same set of reactions. And I think because of the history and of the success of Wikidata, a lot of people are this time more biased towards the positive side, at least when they speak to me. I'm sure that there are a lot of people who don't speak to me who say that it's completely crazy.
And the other thing is that because of the success of Wikidata, I also expect a stronger filter this time with regards to critics than last time. Yes, sure, most of the people are very enthusiastic, but I think it's a very risky idea. Also, I still think it's definitely one that we should try out and go for it, because the rewards will be incredible.
I have put a lot of thought and a lot of background research into the idea in the last 4 or 5 years. So it's not like it's...
Oh, wow.
Yes, it's not coming out from the blue. It is and it's a little bit sad that the actual white papers that are right now don't reflect that, because I didn't have any space to put the related work sections basically into it. But there's a huge area of related work into these things, and this is all based on existing research projects that have started in the 70s and 80s, and where Xerox has had a lot of research into that area and so on. I'm currently at the stage of wanting to flesh out the idea more, of trying to see which structures could work in order to make the whole thing happen. Like, how could the financing look like? Where could the development be located, and so on.
Oh, okay. That's yeah. All right.
And
that's already pretty far ahead in the process, I guess.
Right. I mean, on the other side, it's also a high-risk endeavor. Like, it could completely fail, right? It could be that it actually doesn't work out. The language is much more complicated than this proposal anticipates. And there's so much prior work which has failed. In fact, Umberto Eco wrote a beautiful book called The Search for the Perfect Language, where he does nothing besides listing endeavors that are similar to this that have previously failed. And those are very smart people like Leibniz and Raimund Luls who have tried those things, and all of them have in one way or the other not achieved their goal. And so why would I think to be smarter than all of them? And I don't think I am, right? I'm definitely not smarter than those people. But what I hope could be the things that is different is, first, we know of all these endeavors, so we can learn from them. And second, what none of them did is to make this a collaborative effort, to put this into an environment where you can, where people can work together and create this together. And also, all of them were aiming for a much less constrained goal.
I mean, they were trying to capture the semantics of all of natural language. Whatever we can say, and this is definitely not what we're aiming here for. We're aiming for a much more constrained set. We're aiming for Wikipedia articles, which means it's about declarative statements. It's not about what people say about themselves. It's not about lyrics and so on. So it's a much more constrained set, and this is one of the reasons why I think that we actually have a chance of achieving this goal.
Sure. Yeah. I think your biggest advantage over Leibniz and the rest is the presence of Wikidata entity identifiers.
Yes. This is a huge advantage, and not just the identifiers and the ontological inventory that Wikidata provides, but particularly also that last year we started the lexicographical project inside of Wikidata, where we're aiming to collect knowledge about language, about words, about how they are formed, about the different ways they can be bent and so on. And I think that both of them, both the ontological inventory and the lexicographical inventory, will become extremely important resources for achieving the goal of an abstract Wikipedia.
So the idea is every word or every phrase, noun phrase or whatever you want to call it, it has or will have a page on Wikidata?
Yes, for verbs and nouns, not necessarily for noun phrases. Noun phrases are composed from nouns and other parts of speech, but definitively for nouns. We want all of them to be represented for every single language, with all the senses and all the forms.
Yeah, okay. So the way you structure sentences in the proposal is interesting. You basically have each sentence as a call to a function, where the type of function being called dictates the nature of the sentence, and then it takes in parameters. So potentially there could be thousands of these function types. I wonder if it would be simpler to just do a more traditional sentence diagramming using Wikidata QIDs for not just nouns, but also verbs, adjectives, and everything else, so that you just say, this is the subject, this is the object, this is the predicate, the sub-predicate, and so on.
The answer will probably be somewhere in between. You're right, it has a potential of having a lot of those functions, and I do actually expect a lot of us. So thousands I definitely expect, maybe even 10,000. So I really don't know where the number is, but I definitely expect a large number of those constructors. And you're partially right, we could probably in some cases just go down to a very sentencing constructor way. But the thing is that language is full of idioms which wouldn't actually be amenable to that. For example, in English, you make decisions. In German, you meet decisions, Entscheidungen treffen. And in, I think in French, you take decisions, and so on. So it's not that you are able to actually just, and those are very related languages. You know, we're talking about English, French, German. Those are basically, regarding languages, those are basically our sister languages. So I expect that the variability among different languages is much, much higher. So it's not, I don't think it's actually possible to capture meaning on a very low grammatical level, but we do have to add those functions on top of it. So I do expect that the system is practically able to capture those very low grammatical levels, but will have higher functions, which then translate in different grammaticalizations per language. And the idea is basically that at any level here, you can basically switch into a language idiom or whatever. So this is how the constructors inside the proposal would be built. That you can have all the way from very high level expressions of semantics all the way down to very low level grammar related things, and then depending on how different your languages are, you can reuse more or less of those across languages.
That's very interesting. Of course, the downside to having thousands or tens of thousands of constructors is it's essentially impossible to remember all of them or to...
Yes, definitely. There has to be a very good search interface integrated in the whole thing. Otherwise, you're basically impossible to work on those, yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty heady stuff. If people want to learn more about, the history of that kind of effort, what's a good place to go to? The Echo book? Or is there some project that people can read about or something?
So the Umberto Echo book is great for the further history about this idea. So if you really want to go back to basically all the way to the classical Greek and Indian authors on the topic, then the Umberto Eco book is an amazing resource. It's not, and it's rich in failures and warnings. If you want more current research on the actual topic, I would recommend other works. The most prominent from the one that I was delving deepest in is, so on the one side in linguistics, work on Montague semantics, but also in computer science work into a project called Grammatical Framework by Professor Arne Ranta. And I will also provide you with a link for the website for that where people can read up. He has written a very technical but still quite accessible book about how to use a grammatical framework. It's basically a functional programming language that allows us to generate sentences. This comes from the work at Xerox where they were working on having instruction manuals in several languages.
Yeah. Okay, that's very interesting. So, yeah, I mean, I definitely buy the idea of some kind of notated language, if you want to call it that, or notation system. But there's one thing about the proposal that surprised me, which is that you're talking about creating entire articles as opposed to article fragments like sections and paragraphs. Actually, the first time I read the paper, I thought you were talking about having fragments of text because it seems more in line with your data-centric approach. If they were fragments, they could even be stored in Wikidata with properties like description of childhood or whatever it is. I probably don't need to tell you the benefits of that approach in terms of reuse and modularity.
Yes, no, it's very intentional to actually go for complete articles. One of the major gaps that Wikidata has is exactly that fact that you don't have the narrative of a whole article. You just have...
Right, you can't put some context around a piece of information.
Right, and also if you think about Wikipedia articles, a lot of the Wikipedia articles are from database point of view extremely redundant. So let's take in a sentence like Marie Curie is the only person who has ever received 2 Nobel Prizes in different scientific areas. Or a sentence like San Francisco is the San Francisco is the 4th largest city in California. Those sentences are extremely redundant, and you would never create a database that actually captures them explicitly.
Right.
You would create a database that captures that here are all the winners of the Nobel Prize and the areas they got them, and so on. You would create a database that says here are all the cities in California with the population, and so on. Or even here are all the cities in the US, or even cities in the world with the population, and so on. But you wouldn't have anywhere in the database encoded the explicit fact that San Francisco is the 4th largest, or that Marie Curie got this specific thing. So, and I think those sentences are extremely important for us humans to read and to understand a topic, because they pull information from a lot of places, create a lot of context that help us actually understand and sort that information. And this is why I don't think that Wikidata for a long time will provide by itself something that is directly usable by human readers.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it seems to me that kind of thing, and those 2 sentences you gave are examples of this. That kind of thing could potentially be done via data mining, so that whatever is putting the articles together could actually generate sentences and knowledge like that on its own. Like, for instance, if a city is, in the top 5 or the top 10 cities size-wise in its region, then a sentence expressing that should be stated somewhere in the intro or something else. And more generally, there could be, you can imagine software that does data mining to find the most noteworthy or unique aspects of that entity, and it potentially even creates an entire intro just based on that.
Eventually, yes, I totally agree with that. And there are already research projects which create the first sentence of biographies in a quality that are higher than the current Wikipedia has. So they have AI systems which literally generate the first sentence of a Wikipedia article for biographies. They compare this generated sentence with the one that the Wikipedia article currently has, and the automatically generated wins more often than the human generated. So for the first sentence, this already works well. I just doubt, and I might be completely wrong here, but I just doubt that this will scale to whole articles in a quick enough time frame. So eventually, yes, totally, this stuff will be auto-generated eventually. I just don't think this will happen within the next, 15 years. And until then, we have space to explore other ways to create this knowledge. I mean, we could just lean back and wait. I mean, eventually those things will be solved. But we could also go and create those systems. And actually what I believe is that if we have something like the abstract Wikipedia, we will bring those eventual solutions also faster because we have more training data, because we have training data more accessible in a more accessible way, because for languages which currently actually don't have enough parallel corpora, we would create those parallel corporas with an abstract Wikipedia and so on. So there's a lot of potential that we are just which we can fulfill before the AI solves everything for us, which it will probably eventually do anyway.
Okay, so right, there are different problems that need to be solved, and I guess the question is which will be solved first.
Yeah,
and you're putting your bets on this universal language notation to be the low hanging fruit,
yes.
I guess, if you can call it that.
Yes, totally.
Yeah, that's interesting. I want to ask about the current editing and querying interface for Wikidata. When I look at it, it reminds me of the first year or so of Semantic MediaWiki. Do you know what I mean by that?
Are you talking about the editing or the querying interface? They're very different, right?
Sure. I guess the editing interface, the querying interface, well, I guess it's non-existent. It reminds me of the first few months of Semantic MediaWiki.
Oh, no, come on. The query interface is really awesome.
Well,
if you go to query.wikidata.org, I mean, this interface is one of the best query interfaces I've seen ever for structured queries. Oh,
okay. I thought you were going with that in a different direction. It's just, I mean, well, sure. It lets you create a Sparkle query and has a lot of suggestions that it provides. Okay. But still, ultimately, you're running a Sparkle query.
Yes.
Whether you pay attention to the Sparkle side of things or not.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. It's still it's I don't know. Maybe it's fine. I
mean, it's definitely,
when you compare it to standard search interfaces.
Yeah,
it just seems more technical. It seems more imposing.
Definitely. It's not meant for the casual end user, right?
Right.
You still have to go and create a Sparkle query, as you say. You do have to make a structured query in order to query it. There's a lot of opportunity to go from, let's say, natural language questions that a user can ask to get to the answers, but that's basically what all the big tech companies are after right now, right? I mean, that's the holy grail. If you could translate natural language questions into answers, that would be perfect.
Right. No, I'm actually wasn't thinking about natural language querying. I was thinking about a drill down or a drill down-esque type of interface. Like, when you go to Amazon and you want to find a product, you click through on different categories, and the advantages there is you can see the nature of the data at any point in time. You know how many results are left and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm still hoping that more of those will appear. There have been a few of those. Markus was working on one with Squid. Magnus Manske is repeatedly throwing out possible user interface experiments. There are a number of nice user interfaces on top of Wikidata to allow more casual users to get to it. And I was actually hoping that you would also come at some point and create something like Drill Down on top of it. You have quite a bit of experience with that, right? And I hope that more projects will be around visualizing and making Wikidata data more accessible. There's a lot of opportunity there. I agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. I have thought about it, and maybe I should have just done it already. I mean, I've been thinking about it for years now, so
I thought so.
I need. Tied in with that is the editing interface, which I actually don't see as entirely different, because they both rely on imposing a real data structure, if I can use that term, on all this Wikidata stuff, so that some software that knows that, for instance, a country has a capital but a country doesn't have an atomic number, that kind of thing. And if you can codify that kind of knowledge, that kind of data structure, then you can create forms. Obviously, Wikidata uses forms already for data entry, but forms where it specifies what the data structure is and what the expected set of data is for any entity based on what type of thing it is.
Yeah, a lot of this is already going on. As you probably know, I've written essays about that are not agreeing entirely with this with a strict form of this idea. That I think
I didn't know that actually.
Okay. I don't think that we should be too strict about enforcing these kind of rules, because reality is often much more messier than those rules allow. And both in Wikidata, Wikipedia, and also in the Google Knowledge Graph, I found constantly examples of things that are not fulfilling your obvious rules, right?
Sure, yeah, right. No, I figured you were going to say that, but yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Right.
Yeah.
But aside from that, there are a lot of bits and pieces inside of Wikidata which are already going this direction. There are maintenance pages which report on things like countries without capitals or whatever. There are also the whole validation framework, which actually checks that, for example, the height of a person is within a certain value, or that if you have specific types, that you shouldn't have specific properties, and so on. So this is already there in Wikidata and gives you nice warnings telling you, this looks fishy, are you sure you want to do that? And or creates maintenance page. Or you have Sparkle queries which return things that look fishy and so on. There's also something planned for this year, for 2019, more about implementing so-called shapes inside of Wikidata, which is a new W3C standard that allows to state what the shape of certain data items should be based on the type. So this is exactly capturing those things like, it should have a capital, it shouldn't have an atomic number, and so on, and then allowing to check those things automatically, to have more warnings and so on. So there's a lot of work going on around this kind of data completeness, data consistency work, and I'm expecting even more research going on in that area. A lot of the work that has been going on around Wikipedia around exactly that has slowly moved to Wikidata and being done on that to figure out the quality, the completeness, and the consistency inside of Wikidata. In fact, my PhD was on quality of ontologies and databases. So, yeah.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know about that shapes thing. I guess is it different? This is really getting technical for, I assume very few people listening will care at this point, but is that different from OWL?
It is different from OWL. in the sense that OWL is not actually very good at stating constraints and ensuring completeness. It's called Shackle, and there are two standards going on right now: Shackle and Shax. And if I remember correctly, Wikidata went for Shackle in order to do it, but in the end they're quite similar, and they are more about placing constraints and making consistency checks on the data instead of inferring new knowledge, what OWL was good for.
Yeah, right.
So in OWL, for example, you can't actually state that you have to have a known birthday for every U.S. president, for example. It's impossible to make this a requirement in OWL. But you can say in OWL, every U.S. president has a birthday. I was like, okay, it's just we don't know it yet. But there's no way to actually, within OWL alone, to say, and it has to be given, it has to be known.
Yeah, you can't specify something as mandatory.
Right.
I think there's lots of other
similar
issues with that. But
plenty of those. It's just OWL had a different goal than what the Shapes languages are doing, so it would be unfair to compare it on those tasks, obviously.
Yeah. I have another question. I might cut this out because this is really getting kind of boring. But
you can put it in the appendix.
Right. This information is already stored in Wikidata, from what I understand. It's not in a formal way, but within talk pages, there's a kind of structured. Within talk page of properties, there's a structured notation of some kind to specify. This property should only go on should only go on these pages, and it should only point to these pages of this class, that kind of thing.
Yeah. My understanding is that more and more of this is moving in the actual data space as well.
Oh, okay. Cool. Great. So let's talk about Wikibase on its own. I guess we have been talking about it, but Wikibase is the set of MediaWiki extensions that power Wikidata. Did you come up with the name Wikibase, by the way?
I don't think so, no. It was within the team. We didn't even know it would be called Wikidata in the beginning, right?
Right.
So we came up with a number of names, and then a few of those stuck more longer. I don't exactly know who suggested Wikibase. Wikibase was first used by Watt Cunningham for a different project, and we did ask him for permission to reuse it here as well.
Oh, okay.
And so, I don't even know exactly who came up with it anymore.
Yeah, okay. As I'm sure you know, now lots of people are trying to use Wikibase for their own data sets, or at least thinking about it. There's been a big marketing push from the Wikimedia Foundation and Wikimedia Deutschland about it. They seem to put out a blog post once a month about it or so. And people keep putting together workshops and so on to teach people how to do it. Now, I'm about to say something negative about Wikibase, and I realize this is sort of the second negative thing I'm saying about it, if you count my issues with the editing and querying interface. So I want to preface this by saying that I think Wikidata is great, and the software set up for it seems to be working very well too. So now comes the negative thing about Wikibase outside of Wikidata, but you probably already know how I feel about it. Well, let me say what I think, and then, of course, I want to hear what you think. I think it's a really bad idea in most cases for people to be using Wikibase for their own data sets. Wikibase was, of course, created with very specific goals of supporting a massive, multilingual, fully referenced data set. So there are trade-offs there in terms of the editing and querying interface, which is, somewhat primitive or quite primitive compared to the Semantic MediaWiki cargo page forms setup. And obviously these interfaces could be improved, as we've talked about, but I don't think they'll ever be as straightforward or as easy to use as the SMW cargo page forms thing. So it seems to me like total overkill to use Wikibase for at least for the cases I've heard about, because the sense I get is that in most of these cases the data sets are just in one language, whether it's English or something else. The data set's not even that big, and they're probably not adding references for any of their facts. I do want to add one big exception to that statement, which is something called lingua libre, which is actually, as far as I understand, it's a data set that records the pronunciation of different words in different languages, and that really is something multilingual where the people know what they're doing, and it's data that could easily fit into Wikidata itself. But beyond that, when I see some museum or organization or whatever talking about using it, it just seems like a bizarre use of the technology. And I'm guessing the vast majority of the people who try using Wikibase for their own data sets will not be successful and would be a lot better off using Semantic MediaWiki or Cargo, which, by the way, have never gotten plugged by the Wikimedia Foundation. But that's another story. But it could be that in a lot of cases, the people trying to use Wikibase aren't even aware that there are these alternatives that are actually geared for what they're trying to do. Anyway, that's my rant. I'd like to hear what you think about the whole thing.
I obviously don't agree with the rant. So, yes, there are definitely use cases where Cargo or Semantic MediaWiki are better usable than Wikibase. There's no question about that. I actually think that the use cases that are currently being targeted are pretty good use cases for Wikibase. So, particularly within the cultural memory organization, within GLAM, I think Wikibase makes a lot of sense because of its very good support of references, of very good support of qualifiers and so on, which is something that seems to be important for that area. So for many GLAM use cases and for scientific use cases, like collecting genetic data, for example, and so on, I think Wikibase is a pretty good candidate. For other use cases, especially, for example, for internal knowledge management, I would very much recommend to use something like Semantic MediaWiki or Cargo instead. But it really depends on the use case. It depends what kind of support you can offer for that project. None of those projects, none of these softwares are intuitive, just drop down and everything will get magically better, right? All of these require that you work with the community that you want to set up. All of these require a community to actually use it. All of these require that you accompany the creation of that project within your organization. And there it really depends on many factors, which of those are better and worse for the given use case. So I think it's complicated, and it's good to have those different tools in the mix. And I do agree with one thing, that whoever chooses those projects should be aware of the alternatives and of their different trade-offs. So that's something where you can find easy agreement with me. So it would be great to have a widely visible article on comparing them, on discussing their weaknesses and strengths, and where they are better than the other.
So if somebody from say the Museum of Modern Art in New York came to you and asked you what you would recommend to use for their data set about their holdings, what would you recommend to them?
Well, they're already using Semantic MediaWiki, right? So it would be a shame to actually
Oh, are they already using it?
Yeah. So it would be a shame to actually.
Well, I guess that was a bad example.
Yeah.
Some museum that's not using MediaWiki at all and has a data set.
Well, hey, so lot they've been using long before Wikibase has been developed. So it would be a lot of effort to actually change that. Yeah, no, it really depends on the use case. What do they want to use it for? Who will be the community that's going to maintain the data and curate the data? What is the aim? Is it more scientific? Is it more just like database entry and so on? And depending on that, I mean, if you're just trying to find a easy to set up data entry system, I think nothing would beat Cargo on that, for example. And then to later use this data for drill down and so on. This is where Cargo really shines, if you have strong schemas and everything. And but then if you, for example, want to have or on the other side, if you want to have a scientific community discussing the possibilities of how certain things could be and so on, and what the literature says on that, I think Wikibase is by far the best candidate for that. So I haven't thought sufficiently through the different use cases, and I would just listen to what the actual use case is before I make a recommendation, and probably ask a lot of questions.
Okay, but yeah. I mean, I haven't really thought about a scientific use for it in terms of debate and discussion and so forth. But what in the case of, say, a museum or a library or something? What is it that they could say to you that would get you to recommend Wikibase?
For example, if they have a lot of unknowns in the data set, which they want to collaboratively fill with an external community of researchers. That's something where I think that the capability of having references being tied so closely to the data model can really shine, and that can, yeah.
All right. Well, I respect you a lot as a person, but
we can agree to disagree on that. That's fine.
Yeah, I think we'll have to agree to disagree.
I think I agree with you that a lot of use cases where Semantic MediaWiki or Cargo would be more appropriate, and it really depends, as said.
Yeah, I guess the thing that bothers me is just the lack of knowledge. It seems like people don't even know about the alternatives, and I think that the people plugging Wikibase really owe it to their audience to let them know that there are these alternatives, and just because they've only seen Wikidata doesn't mean that.
So that's something that's something where I easily agree with you. So yeah, it would be better to have whoever makes the decision be more knowledgeable about alternatives, and that's why I'm saying it would be great to have a nicely more prominent article about those.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, we found a point of agreement then on moving on. I guess that was...
Maybe you should write such an article.
I don't know. I don't know if they would publish anything I wrote.
But it doesn't have to be on the Foundation blog, right? I mean, something like IBM Developer Works have recently published a nice series of articles on Wikidata. And this is a space where it could be interesting to publish. I mean, you basically need a place where that has a good name and that you can link to for this kind of thing.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I published things. I wrote a book and everything, but I don't know. It feels like there's a disconnect. That the people who know about Wikibase will never see anything I write. Seems like it. Sorry, I don't mean to sound. This is starting to sound very. It's starting to sound like I'm complaining, but really, I just feel bad for the people who are if they're making a choice that's not fully informed.
Yeah.
That might have been my last question directly about Wikidata and Wikibase. I wasn't sure whether to ask about your time on the Wikimedia Foundation board, since maybe the less said about it, the better. To be clear, this is not anything negative, because I don't think you did anything wrong during your time on the board, but it obviously turned out in an odd way. Let me ask you this, though. Do you think the Wikimedia Foundation could benefit from having more developers, MediaWiki developers, on its board or in leadership positions in general?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, I think that a person with good technical understanding would be beneficial for the board.
Yeah. This would be the part where I ask about what you're doing at Google, but if you talked about that, then it would require vetting by the people at Google, and I didn't want to bother with that. So I'll just I'll just guess that you're doing something there related to data in the web.
So I can say that I'm working on the Google Knowledge Graph, and
okay.
And I can say that I'm working on trying to answer as many questions as possible that you might ask Google. But I think that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Well, very good. That's great. That's I mean, talk about something that affects a lot of people, hundreds of millions or more. So let me ask you, you've been in the U.S. for, I guess, 3 or 4 years now. How has it been living in the U.S. and more specifically living in California, which I guess is really a separate question?
So, as you also know, the last few years have been very interesting in the United States. So first things, I really love the weather here. California is amazing about that. And this is definitely one great plus of living here. Also the nature here. I mean, just going to the coast or going to the national parks, it's amazing. And it's really a shame that they're currently closed down. But this is just a wonderful thing to be in. Also, I mean, there are quite a few negatives about it as well. I mean, from the point that the United States can't stop, people using guns and shooting each other, and to the point that the United States are not ashamed about the fact that they have children going hungry to school, or that children already have lunch debts, which is a completely insane idea for the country which likes to think of itself as being the greatest country in the world. So there are a lot of those things that are things I hope to see changed during my lifetime and to improve. But there are also so many beautiful things about it. Me and my family have never felt as welcome in any place as we are in the US. The diversity here is so mind-blowing compared to any place I lived before. And I lived in Berlin, in Karlsruhe, in Rome, in Croatia. I mean, I lived in many places, but nowhere I found that people have been so welcoming to people who are different as I have found here in the States. And this is something that we are deeply thankful for, and which we really enjoy about living here.
Okay, great. A rare foray of this podcast into politics, but that was a nice positive note to end this podcast on. That's pretty much all my questions. So Denny, thanks a lot for coming on the podcast. It was great talking to you.
Thank you for having me.
This has been another episode of Between the Brackets. I want to again thank my guest, Denny Vrandečić, I hope I pronounced those C's right, of Semantic MediaWiki and Wikidata fame. Thanks for a great talk. Thanks to all of you for listening, and I'll see you next time.